Hey y'all, Chantel here. Welcome back to season 2 of Chantel Speaks. I'm so excited today because I have a very special guest, my brother, my friend and confidant, motivator, big champion, best supporter of Chantel, and his name is Brother Robert Tyrone Lilly. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's been a long time in the making.
It has. And so I wanted it to make it very special for you because it has been so long
Okay.
that we're here on video and we also have an audience. So thank you to our beautiful audience who was here to celebrate with us on the last minute. Thank y'all so much. So first, if you don't remember, I stated that I would wear a shirt every time that I do this. So if you have shirts, send them to me. But today I have on just a kid from East Austin. Today we're in East Austin at Dogwood headquarters. So I'm excited that to be here is very, monumental for me, or um, it just feels good, right? For something that you've wanted to do so long and be able to do it in your hometown and where you're from. And so my cousin Johnny is the one that created this shirt. And you can follow him on Instagram at T-shirt Johnny, TEESHRT JHNY. I think Johnny needs to get like an easier T-shirt, but follow him there on Instagram, a handle, an easier Instagram handle. But follow him there, and we're gonna get into it.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes. So again, Chantel Speaks is a faith-based podcast, right? And so we talk about God, spirituality, but we also talk about life and what's happening in life, entertainment. I've done segments about Diddy and his issues going on, and right now we know he's on trial, and Cassie's testifying, but we won't get into that too much. But I might do a part 2, so be prepared for that. So today, I want to hit a little bit with you about that, but also we're going to talk about mental health.
Okay.
And we're going to introduce who you are, and I want you to tell your story too.
Okay.
So what does it mean to yield to faith to you? And I chose that question for you because everybody knows Brother Rob is a talker. And so he will say, yield. He was like, I'm going to yield. I'm going to yield. And so I had this question in my notes. And so I was like, you know what? I want to start off and ask him, what does it mean to yield to faith?
All right. Well, I think that's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. I'm excited about what looms ahead in the future for you and the work that you're doing, both professionally and personally. And to whatever extent that I could be a part of that journey, I'm always grateful. And the shoes on the other foot. I interviewed you a year ago, and so now we turn that table around.
Yeah.
When I think about yield to faith, I think about the yellow light at the intersection of a crossing. Now, I'll be honest with you, there have been times when I just blow past it. But I recently did some preparation for my new job working at the county, where we had to do a defensive driving course. And what I learned was that the yellow doesn't mean slow down. It means stop.
True.
And so, yielding to faith means for me coming to the end of myself, stop trusting in myself, stop relying exclusively on my strengths and ability, because quite frankly, many of the things that I've sought to accomplish, I just did not have everything in my own strength and power. And when I got to a place where I said I can't, something greater than me said I can. And that gave me the ability to go beyond what I thought I could do.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So it's like a surrender.
I like the word surrender, although I think sometimes people get turned off by the word surrender because it implies defeat. And I don't think yielding to faith is about being defeated. I think it's about coming to a realization that, at least for me it was, that in and of myself alone, what I wanted to do, I had not the knowledge and the wisdom and the strength to do it.
Right.
I needed a resource outside and above and beyond myself. And that's what faith was able to present and provide me to do.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So, okay, let's get into our topic about mental health.
Yes.
All right. So
I love the topic.
The next question is, what are the 5 pillars of crisis? Now, it doesn't have to be like some dictionary definition. But
Okay.
like when you think of crisis, what are 5 things that you think about? Because when we were colleagues, we were still colleagues, but we were co-workers in grassroots leadership, and so we dealt with a lot, especially dealing with folks who come through the participatory defense program. Excuse me, they're in crisis. So what would you say is
Yeah.
our 5 pillars, 5 things that you believe that?
Well, I like the way that you reframed it because initially, I was trying to think of, have I learned anything formulaic along that lines? And there was nothing that immediately I could recall. But I used the word crisis quite a bit when I was there. And when I think about people that are in crisis, if I could characterize them with 5 pillars, if you will, the number one would be emergency, right? When somebody's in crisis, there's an emergency.
Yeah.
The second one would be some instability, right? There's this person is not only needing immediate support, but they're needing support because they're not at that point, at that very moment, able to hold themselves as well as they want to. Then I think, another pillar for crisis is going to be safety. There's got to be a place where I can come and say, hey, 911, emergency, I need support.
Yeah.
So there's emergency, there's instability, and then there's a need for a safe place to disclose that. The fourth one would be a listening ear, right? There's got to be somebody that not only you can deliver this information to, but somebody that can listen to you critically and say, I hear your need. I genuinely hear your need. And I think the last one would be resource. There's got to be a resource. There's got to be something that we supply that individual or individuals so that you're not just saying, here's a coat, go and be well, right?
Yeah.
This person may need more than a coat. They may need more than a prayer. They may need some real community. And so I would add that on to that last piece, resource from community.
I love it. Thank you. And so this is why we do this kind of stuff, because everybody thinks differently. So I feel like sometimes I should have added a word into that, but I'm glad that you gave those words, which were emergency, instability, safety. What was it? I know it was resources, and the fifth
Listening,
one was
a listening
ear. So resources was what I had on my list, right? So I think maybe if I would have worded, what are 5 pillars that cause crisis? Then maybe your answers would have been a little different, but they still resonate the same. So what I put was 1, mental health. Mental health is a cause for crisis, right? Transportation. Resources was 1. Food, disparities, and housing, which is like instability and all the things that you're saying, right? So that's what I feel that in this work that we do, in this social justice realm, is that so many individuals come to us or any other organization, community space where they're suffering mental health, they're with their mental health. They're suffering because they can't get to where they need to get. They don't even have the funds to get a bus pass or anything, or things that might be too far to even walk to the destination. Resources can be so many things, money, just financial, like wanting to go to college or had some type of continual education and don't have the resources for that. Food disparities, food insecurities. That's a crisis. Like if your stomach is not full, how can you really be productive in society properly, right? And housing, if you're unstable with your housing like that, I could just only imagine how I would feel if I didn't have a place to live.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there. So I just say, in response to that, I think back to the times when I've had crisis in my life, and there was mental illness that was a part of that experience. I mean, it was a moment of great shock. There were times I couldn't even focus. And I truly needed somebody to sit down with me and just help me think, because I was at a point where there was so much pressure, I couldn't even hold a good internal conversation with myself to produce an answer that would resolve my problem. I needed someone to hold, as we say in the organizer community, hold space with me. And tragically, I would go through some doors, and they would have the shingle on the door saying help, but I never walked away. Seldom did I walk away, feeling like that was the place that I should have walked into for help. And then the places that I didn't expect it to come from, oftentimes would be places where it came from, you know.
Yeah.
Since this is a program of faith, I mean, I remember one express moment where a gentleman came to me and said, I heard the Lord told me to give you this, and pulled out a $20 bill. And that may not seem like much, right? And I'm be quite honest with you, when I heard him say, the Lord told me to give you this, I'm looking at you like, man, you crazy, man. But truly, I couldn't hold that, because at that moment, I was desperately in need of food, and that $20 meant the next meal for me. Right. And I think beyond that, it was a reminder that this thing called God, that I do believe in, there was something to it, because of all things for this guy to do, why this and why now?
Because you needed it.
Because I needed it, and it was at the very moment that I was desperate.
Yeah. But that's like bringing it back to faith. God knows all things, and he knows and he does things right on time and brings people into our life at the right time. But sometimes, too, we have to be sensitive to that, because a lot of times we're not sensitive to his spirit and him talking to us. And so that man that you're speaking of, he was obedient to what God told him to do.
Yeah, and it made an impact on me, something that I'm obviously recalling right now, because there's no way I could explain that other than there has to be something greater and bigger and more attuned to my need than me, because I didn't produce that. There was nothing I did to cause that support. And I can go on from example to example to example, and that's one of the main reasons why I continue to hold an idea, that's grounded in faith, because I can't explain these things any other kind of way. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a very rational and thoughtful individual. I believe in using my critical mind. But there are some things that I have not been able to explain using rational tools.
Yeah.
And so I've just had to concede that there is something greater that is aware of my life, that is concerned with the welfare of my life, and to the degree that I can align myself with that force, I think it would be wise of me, because I wouldn't be here right now if it were not for the miraculous delivery from prison after a 30-year sentence at being charged as a habitual offender and being released after 4 years. Like, that just does not happen.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is like my partner, which he would be here today. His situation is like a miraculous thing. 65 years and 5 years and all of that. Shout out to Al, your pal. So let's talk about you.
Okay.
Let's talk about
What do
who
you wanna
Brother
know?
Rob is. So remember, we're talking about mental health, so Brother Rob, you are an organizer.
Yes.
And you are a college graduate of Abilene Christian University.
That is correct.
And you also, you're a husband and a father.
Yes.
And you have this mantra. You say that you are the face of mass incarceration.
Yes.
And let's talk about that and also bridge that into mental health. And Everett, can we get some wide shots too, please? Thank you.
I use the term the face of mass incarceration because, we are interested in criminal justice issues when the story is extreme. Like your partner, 65 years in prison. Mm-hmm. People sit up straight.
Yeah.
And then if you see a guy who's got a life sentence, right, or a guy that's on death row. But when I talk about being the face of mass incarceration, I'm trying to point out that there are thousands of people like me who have entered prison, exited, entered again, exited, entered again, exited, and some are still going through that cycle. And so I've spent 21 years of my life literally incarcerated out of the 54 years that I've been on this earth. That's not a story that I think we really pay attention to. I think we dismiss stories like that. We usually either we pity people that way, or we dismiss them as incapable or unwilling to manage their lives. But for me, at the root of my repeated incarcerations were a couple of things that I would point to. One would be mental illness, that I had an untreated and unidentified diagnosis, right? Eventually it would be a diagnosis. And I had issues with traumatic experiences that I had never faced in my life. The loss of my mother being one of the most prominent ones, but also
8 years old.
at 8 years of age,
Right.
but also growing up in New York City at the height of one of the most volatile moments of our city's history, which was the 70s, right? The 60s were horrific, but the 70s were more devastating because now there was no concern for what was happening in the ghettos, right? They had considered us, you know, ungrateful because, you know, we rebelled, we burned down things, and so yeah, you get what you deserve. That's I think what the attitude was for the large part for people in my community and those who had power over my community. So I grew up in a very blighted context, and having witnessed that, and really never having any place to go process what that experience was like. I'm carrying around I'm carrying around a burdensome load
Yeah.
that I really didn't even understand. And it would take me years to understand. And when I finally began to understand it, I realized, okay, I need a place to process. I need a place to understand and dissect this experience because I'm feeling, now I know the word is oppressed, and I didn't know what oppression was.
Right. So before we get to that moment where you knew that you had to find a place to express this, like you say you were born in the 70s, 1970s.
1970,
to
yeah.
be exact, in New York. And then you moved
To California.
to California.
Yeah, the 1980s, and that
Yeah.
was at the height of what we would call the gang, era. The gangs were becoming more prominent in the 80s. News coverage was capturing the exploits of many of the young people that were involved in gangs. We didn't have as many firearms as we do now, but we still had shootings, and drive-bys were becoming more and more a tool of the street culture. So I was forced to navigate that, from 13, 14 on up until I turned 19 when I left California and moved to Texas.
Right.
So here, that's another trauma because now I'm
Right.
being moved from place to place, cultures and environments I have no knowledge of how to really survive in, but I've got to figure out how to survive or I'm not going to make it.
Yeah. So let's stay in California for a moment, because we're talking about these traumatic experiences. So you've lost your mother at the age of 8.
Yeah, I lost more than 8.
It's you and your siblings and your father, and y'all moved to California. And this is where because I know a little bit of your story. So you told me this is where you ended up in juvenile.
I ended up in juvenile multiple times, starting from 12 on up.
Yeah. And how was that experience? Not knowing yet that you have to find a space where you can express yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was angry. Obviously, well, I won't say obviously, I'm going to say that I was angry at the loss of my mother. She died at 25. I was angry at my father, who was making grown man decisions that I didn't understand. He needed help, and he had to find a partner. So he's trying different relationships, but sometimes these relationships are not really there for us, they're there for him, and it was hurtful because these people didn't always treat us well. And then on top of that, I'm angry because we are still very destitute. There were times we didn't know where the food was coming from. It was just my dad.
Yeah.
So I had to care for my siblings. I was an adult before I knew what an adult was, caring for my youngest sibling, who was actually a toddler at the time that my mother passed away. And then I'm living, at some point, the woman that would become my eventual stepmother, she returned to our lives, and that added another layer of complication because now I had siblings, and through that marriage, that we weren't always very kind to each other. We didn't get along very well, and so just being in that home was oppressive. And so the streets became my outlet, and of course, with the streets come the drugs. With the drugs and the alcohol comes incarceration. And there were times that I would say that I would prefer to be incarcerated than being at home because it was just so uncomfortable, and I had no way of really. I tried to express myself to my dad, but I didn't really know how to tell him, look, this doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
You know, let's do something else, please.
Yeah.
He there was no way. I didn't have the words to say that.
Right. And so speaking of um, juvenile, and you saying that you would have rather been incarcerated than being at home. I remember you sharing that when you were in juvenile, that's where you got your affinity of um, books, reading books.
Actually, actually my desire for reading started at younger.
Okay.
I had a library card going back to when I was in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in jail that I began to explore ideas, and it was actually around the time I was 17 years old. I graduated from a GED program, and the teacher told me, "You're very smart.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about going to college?" And I had heard the word college. My dad talked about either college or the military.
Yeah.
So she convinced me that I could do college, and so I signed up for college, and I had two professors. One was an African, one was an African American. One taught sociology, and the other one taught black history. It was the African that taught black history. And those two professors, man, they blew my mind because one opened me up to a world that I didn't even know existed beyond America, which even then I didn't know nothing about America. And then the other one helped me to dig into what it meant to be a black person in America and understand the long train of struggle that I come from. So that was profound. And I picked up those books. I could tell you one of the first books that I remember reading was Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. It was in that book that I learned that white was a social construct. And when the colonialists came to America, we didn't identify each other along racial lines. We identified each other by our faith orientation or the lack of it, or the dismissal of another person's faith orientation, meaning, you know, the Europeans called the natives savages, right? Mm-hmm. Told them that they didn't have culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, reading became, it not only became an escape, but it became an escape from oppression.
Nice. Thank you. And one other thing, and so I don't really know if this happened in New York or if it happened in California, but we're talking about outlets and expressing,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about, you know, your affinity for poetry.
I knew you were coming with that one.
And so you were rapping, but you had nobody to guide you or help you to even for that love to flourish around then.
Yeah, so being from New York, hip hop was a part of that culture, but I really didn't grow up in New York as hip hop was becoming more of a thing. When I got to California, hip hop started taking on shape in reality. So I caught the bug and I started writing rhymes mostly for my stepbrother. He would perform them and I'd watch him getting all the attention, and I thought, and he's saying my words.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like,
Ghostwriter.
yeah, I was a ghostwriter, that's correct. So he's saying my words, and I didn't have the delivery. I didn't know how to do what he was doing. So I just started trying it myself and got to a place where I felt more confident. I don't remember really ever doing a lot of what he was doing, which was kind of capturing the audience at school, but we did get to a place where we formed our own group and we got on stage. I remember performing at the Watts Towers. That was phenomenal. We did do some studio music, when we were younger. But it was in prison that I think I found my voice. I found my voice as an artist, as a poet. I believe that, I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with my eyes closed and I would have a pen and pad next to my bed and I'd write songs and they would go off the page and I could barely tell what the words were the next day, but I'd figure it out and songs were just coming to me. It was like I was a conduit for this creative content at that point in my life.
Wow.
It was a very creative period in my life.
Wow. So you always say that you've been to prison 4 times.
I've been to prison 4 times.
Which time was this? Do you feel that you found
that was that? Well, at that point, I think I found my voice when so there was a transitional phase because I was leaving juvenile. I wrote a lot of songs when I was in juvenile, but when I got out and I went back, I was in the feds. So between the ages of 21 and 30, I wrote probably some of my most meaningful content that I'm actually today looking forward to one day releasing, which I've never recorded any of it officially, like in the most excellent way of recording.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wrote some of the most powerful music that I've ever written that I'm so proud of to this day, between those ages, 21 and 30. But I gave up that dream because I thought, man, who's going to be a 30-year-old rapper? Now we got Jay-Z at 60 years old rapping, right? But there was no example of that.
Yeah.
You know, for me, when they gave me that 10-year sentence, that was an eternity for me because I was 21 years old. The only thing I can look at to understand 10 years was look backwards 10 years.
Okay. I'm excited about hearing those ROMs and getting in the studio.
Yeah,
Can't wait for that.
Well, I'm waiting. My sister's invited me to Boston to come out there and do some music.
Oh yeah.
So I
Shout
just
out
was
to
told my
Dora
wife
Lilly.
last night that we're gonna buy some tickets and we're gonna go down there because she and her boyfriend have a band and they got a studio, and so
Okay.
I'm like, okay, you know what?
That's
She's asking
dope.
me to do it. She believes in me. She really does believe in me, and that kind of love is what brought me back from the precipice of destruction.
Yeah, shout out to Dora Lilly.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, our topic is mental health.
Yes.
And so we've talked about New York, we've talked about California, and we're transitioning to Texas and how you found that when you decided to let that outlet out, so that you knew that you needed to express yourself.
Yeah. So after coming home from prison in 2000, and I came home from prison once in 2000, I lasted probably 16 months tops. Within maybe 6 months or shorter, or a little bit longer, I was back on crack cocaine, and I was in an unhealthy relationship, and I would go again to prison. I would get violated to the feds, and while I'm getting ready to exit the feds after a year's violation, I was informed that I had another pending delivery charge. I was mortified. I mean, I literally dropped to my knees in isolation from everybody else, and I broke down because I said to myself, I remember saying to myself, what have you done? I just served 8 years in the feds. I was only out for 16 months, and now I'm looking at another lengthy prison stay.
Yeah.
I was able to get a 12-year sentence. I did 4 years on that 12 eventually.
God.
But it was in that time that I started doing some reflecting on my life. I mean, at that moment, I had already had upwards of 13, 14 years of incarceration. So in a very short period of time, right? My teens are getting eaten up, my 20s are getting eaten up. So I'm asking myself some serious questions, like what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Or what's wrong, period.
Right.
Because I felt truly like something is off and I don't know what to do to address it.
Yeah.
I would study a lot, and during that 4 years that I was away, I learned so many things. Even the 8 years I was away, I learned so many things. When I came home at 30, now I'm 30 years, 30, this time actually I did 4 more years in the TDCJ. I came home at 30, 34, something like that. And I'm trying to figure out life.
Yeah.
I hadn't had any real time outside of prison to figure out life. So I'm literally growing up for the first time in my life outside of the prison context.
Yeah.
I would stumble and fall very quickly, but I would get back up. And in that getting back up, I realized I almost threw my life away again. So now I'm like, okay, I really got to figure out what's happening, what's really going on. And at the end of the day, I kept asking the question to people around me, how do you heal from white supremacy?
Yeah.
I felt like my issues with addiction, because I went to the 12-step programs and they would always talk about we're powerless, or that we're the cause of our problem. And I was like, I think that's simplistic. Mm-hmm. I think when I look at my life, I can't just look at my life as the origination of this problem. This problem is bigger than that. And so, kind of putting a bow on this comment, I remember learning the difference between a social problem and a personal problem. Mm-hmm. And I realized that was what I needed to better understand. How did my social environment contribute to this internal reality, this internal discord, this internal strife that I was feeling?
Yeah.
And that was more of a healthier way of solving my problem than looking at myself as defective or diseased or what have you.
For sure. And I remember a conversation we've had about someone in prison has said to you, well, didn't you learn? Didn't your mother and father
Yeah,
teach you?
yeah. So he would tell me, he was very adamant, very arrogant, and he thought he had the answers for us, and he would scold us and tell us we were in prison because we were disobedient children, that we should have just listened to our mothers and fathers. And I remember feeling demoralized by that statement, but I didn't know how to respond to that person. And that's when I was in school at the time, studying sociology at the time, and I learned the difference between a social problem and a personal problem. A social problem being one where the origins of the problem are outside of the individual and the solution is outside of the individual. And a personal problem is the origins are in the individual and the solution is in the individual. So here it was, I'm dealing with a social problem and you're trying to impose on me a personal solution.
Sure.
It'll never solve itself. So I eventually would learn to respond to this guy by telling him, man, you're making a lot of assumptions. You assume I had a mother and a father. You assume that my mother and father knew whatever you call right and wrong and that they taught me that right and wrong. You assume that they were the only teachers I had, that no one else ever taught me anything, that my parents were the only ones to teach me. And the truth of the matter was I went to an institution called the school. I had people outside of the home called peers. There was a thing called culture and music that was a teacher to me. And so I realized this person was flawed in their analysis,
Right.
and I rejected, wholesale everything he had to say, because I realized he was being judgmental and not listening, and nor trying to be critical and understand, a really complex world that we're living in, and that my choices were shaped by.
Right. So now that you have, you now know that this is a social problem that you're dealing with, right? And in your evolution as to expressing yourself and tying this to mental health and being diagnosed and all of the things, where is your transition at this point?
I mean, I think that's why I became an organizer, because I realized that social problems require a collective in order to bring about that change. And I needed to find community that held in common the concerns that I was being shaped by. I heard Dr. Tony Roach, a minister a long time ago that I sat under, he said, your ministry grows out of the context of your crisis. And for me, I was dealing with challenges that I needed to find other people who were willing to fight those challenges with me or to resist those things that were, coming against us. And so that was my shift, that I very firmly believed that what I was grappling with I needed support.
Yeah.
I needed this thing called faith, but I also needed to find faith in other human beings that I could trust and fight with. And then I think, I'm still in an evolutionary stage because, as we did that work together over there at Grassroots Leadership, it became clear to me that we cannot do policy change without concerning ourselves with the everyday struggles of the person that comes through our doors, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I sought out ways in which, and of course the work I'm doing now is not the solution to that. I think what's going to have to happen for me is that I create the kind of space that I most want to execute in, and what I'm looking for does not fully exist and is not accessible to me just yet, except in my mind, and that's something that I'm walking out with my colleagues, some of the men that I spend time in prison with. We're working on an idea together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that something that we learned in our human rights training and that I took away with is, teaching them their rights, but also dignity. So even in that space.
That part.
Yeah.
That part. I'm glad you said it, because what I didn't fully say just a moment ago was I went someplace and I was explaining to them, in my exasperation, what I was experiencing, in this particular one way of doing things. And they said, that's not honoring the whole person.
That's good.
And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. That's true.
Yeah.
It felt very transactional. And so, even like I said again, even the work that I do today, which is I work as a peer support specialist within the Travis County Public Defender's Office in the Mental Health Division. This is an institution that is a part of the government apparatus. I'm not looking to this entity for all of what I believe needs to happen for change in these areas that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about mental illness. I'm concerned about mental illness at the intersection of the criminal legal system. I have a brother that's been incarcerated for 20 years. Conrad Lilly is his name. I have another brother, my youngest baby brother that I was caring for as a child. He died in 2008 of an overdose. So these are issues. Again, your ministry grows out of the context of your crisis.
Yeah.
So I'm wrestling with the things that my life has been misshapen by or shapen by, in hopes that before I leave this earth, I can make some meaningful contribution towards what I believe a solution could be. And I think at the end of the day, one of the places I've landed most at is much of what I wrestle with won't really change until we change the narrative about the communities that are stigmatized by these issues. You know, we have to see people with mental illness as people. We have to see people with records or histories of felony convictions as people, as human beings.
Yeah.
And we live in a society, I think, that's hypocritical. On one hand, we talk about second chances, and on one hand, we talk about forgiveness and compassion. But when it really comes down to like applying that, we're hypocrites, because we talk about it, but we don't truly honor it in our dealings with those that really most need that understanding, and that burdens my soul.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, in this space that we've created to speak about mental health and folks who have been incarcerated, and when they have returned back into society to reenter, that we treat them as humans, as we all are. But I love that quote. Your ministry grows out of your crisis.
Out of the context.
Context.
That's
of your
a big
crisis.
piece of it, right?
Yeah, because I can say, like, you know, everything I do now is through mental health. Like, even with Help Heal Happy, like, that's an intersection of mental health and wellness. And, you know, we want to provide authenticity and healing tools and laughter to combat, you know, mental health. Although I've never been diagnosed with a mental health illness, I know that I struggle with mental self-talk, negative self-talk. And so, and I was able to really hone in on that when, you know, you said you should go be a a peer support specialist. So mine is mental health, right? I think you did what, reentry at first?
I did peer support for recovery.
Okay.
And now I'm actually, this weekend I start the next version of mental
Right.
health. Shout out to Regalado Recovery. Shout out to Regalado Recovery. Take a look at her.
Yeah. So when I took that training, then I was able to diagnose. Like, I knew that, you know, I had some kind of issue with something. I feel like we all do. We all have like mental health issues that are not or undiagnosed. We suffer from depression, sadness. Like, we're human, and so it's just how you combat those things. And so, like I said, mine, I know, is negative self-talk, and so that's the whole point of like Help Heal Happy, is because, you know, now it started out with me being the emotional healing life coach, but, you know, you shouting out the recovery.
Regalado Recovery.
Yes, like that's what I want it to be. Like, I want it to be a place for recovery, folks to come for recovery. So many things, so many big dreams. But yes, back to the quote, like, your ministry
Grows out of the context of your crisis.
Right.
And I emphasize that word context because, again, what I've seen in our society is we want to isolate the individual and pretend as if these moments, whatever the moment is, and I'm specifically thinking about the criminal legal system, that this person's actions are divorced and are separate from their past, separate from the events that transpired, you know, leading up to that. And so now we must punish this individual as if none of this, there's no other contributing factor as to why this individual found themselves doing or acting in a certain kind of way. And I just think it's unacceptable because none of us, no human life is shaped in a vacuum. We're formed by people, institutions, and experiences.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, until we can get to a place where we can scrutinize all of those phenomena, we're letting society off the hook.
Yeah.
And we're making an excuse for not changing elements of our society that are structurally and foundationally flawed, right?
Right.
Just case in point, thinking about, you know, body types and self, you know, the impression that young ladies have of themselves. We grow in a society where one kind of image of beauty is submitted as the standard.
Oh, yeah.
And so many young girls grow up, you know, with body issues, eating disorders. So do we put that on the mind of the person alone,
Right.
or do we scrutinize the society?
Yeah.
And I think the fairest and most accurate way to go forward for me is going to be looking at the totality of my life, and my life is not divorced from the reality that I was shaped by or misshapen by.
I love it. Thank you, Brother Rob, for being here today. Do
Thank
you
you for
have
having me.
any last thoughts or words that you want to say? I definitely want to have the people to follow you on Facebook,
Yeah,
Robert Tyrone Lilly.
Robert Tyrone Lilly. You have to look me up under Robert Tyrone Lilly because my father did have a couple of other children.
Okay. So, is there anything that you want to say before we close this out?
You know, what I think I'll say is, if someone out there who's listening to this podcast today is suffering, you don't have to suffer in silence. The biggest thing that I've learned how to do, and the reason this conversation was important for me, is to the degree that I've maintained and preserved my mental health, to that same degree I've been able to maintain my physical well-being and my liberty from the cage.
Yeah.
And how I've done that is I've opened up to other people. I heard somebody say years ago, we're only as sick as our darkest secrets. I've learned to talk about my secrets to other people. I found one person to go to and talk to about the things that I was ashamed of. And what I've learned is that the prison that they were sending me to was not prison. The prison that I was locked up in was my fear and my shame.
Yep.
And so I just encourage folk to not allow shame and fear to hold you bondage. Trust that other people have had experiences like you, and there's other people that you can talk to and find your way to freedom.
That's good stuff, Brother Rob. Thank you. Yeah, that's what we want to do here. We want to free you from bondage and shame, and you're not alone. So leave us a comment. You can follow us on YouTube at Help Heal Happy. You can follow us on Instagram, Chantel_speaks. And if you want to donate, Cash App us at Chantel Speaks. Zell us, 512-803-1300.
Venmo, come on with it.
Venmo, I think I'm Help Heal Happy on Venmo.
Okay.
So it's a lot of different stuff, but go to YouTube. You can find us there. We're on all streaming podcasts, Apple, Spotify. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share.
One last thing I'll say is please check out our new documentary airing on August 22nd in Abilene, Texas. Decipher 360. Go to Decipher 360 Films, DACIPHER 360 Films, under Tailor Made Studios. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank y'all so much. This is again our season 2 of our video going live. Well, we're not live, but we got a live audience. And so that is what I'm like super, super happy about. So thank y'all again for being here. I appreciate y'all. Appreciate you, Brother Rob.
Appreciate you.
I love you. Peace and blessings.
I love you too.
Yes. God is good. Yeah. Let's do, if you want to, do something for the people.
One line of poetry.
One line of poetry before we head on out of here.
Okay. Searching, seeking, hunting, trying to find another place to ease my mind. Traveling the roads of old. Shit, I don't know where I'm headed, but I'm guided by my soul. Maybe it's my great-great-grandpappy. Pops used to tell me about him. I was a lad, see. He told me he was strong and proud. He showed me his picture. His face stood out in the crowd. But I was young and innocent. So damn young, it just all didn't make sense. You see, he talked about the motherland, where the next man's brother was the next man's brother man. Then I was young, but now I know because I'm older. Damn, I'm tired of this shit. And looking over my shoulder. Another place, another day to look forward to. I might find it. What about you? Never stopping, because stopping means it's over and I'm dead. But I'm not going to fall off the edge. And when I get there, I'm letting everybody know there's another place to go.
That's what's up right here, live on Chantel Speaks. See y'all later.
You better give me a hug.